that you can literally stand on and do the same thing. So it preserves and protects the area that you're interested in doing the detailed work that you may be able to get more evidentiary information from.
And once you've done those photographs all the way back, what do you do next?
In this case, once the initial photographs were taken, determine if chemical processing is necessary, or could I seize the item. In this case, it appears that these imprints are on a concrete base. It's a little difficult to take the entire concrete foundation and remove it, but it has been done before. In this case, again, now we work from the back towards the front, using some type of enhancement reagent to try to increase the amount of detail and the clarity.
That agent is what you sprayed in New York on the floor.
That would be one of them, yes.
Those images that aren't visible to the naked eye.
Even if some of the image is visible, it can give you additional detail in the periphery or other area where there's just trace amounts.
Okay. And you work your way to the front, taking pictures as you spray?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, once you've finished that, are you done with the floor?
No, sir.
What's now? What do you do now?
You want to take overviews to show the work that you have done, right, and show any modifications that you made to the scene. And again, make the determination, can I take the area that that prints on with me? If it was a tile floor, we could pull the tiles up. But again, because it's on concrete, we'd have to rely on the documentation.
And these are still 90-degree straight down shots?
That would be the analysis part. You would still take general photographs on an angle showing the relationship.
But as you worked your way up and worked your way back, those would be vertical, I mean...
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then you're taking general photos from different angles?
Yes, sir.
Okay, then what?
With digital, you would make sure that the photos came out, that you had an image captured, and that it was sufficient for whoever needs.
Okay, now let's...
You would also take a sample of the blood from those areas for later typing or DNA analysis, should it be necessary.
Did you find any evidence that they took a sample of this blood and analyzed it?
No, sir.
So we surmise it's Paul's blood. It could be somebody else's blood there too?
Possible.
And the only way you could rule that out is take samples?
Is to take a sample, do an analysis, and try to identify the donor.
And that was never done?
To the best of my knowledge, no, sir.
Okay. So then we have a number of surfaces. Let me have them put up number 26, stage 26. Okay, so, and just to cut to the chase, this is the door to the, well, I could see it a minute ago. There you go. That's the door to the feed room?
Yes, sir. The door frame on the right, door on the left.
Okay, did you see any evidence that they not dusted, that's old-timey language, that they processed that door or any other surface in the feed room for fingerprints?
Not to the best of my knowledge.
Now tell the jury, please, in a summary fashion, what you would have done. Well, first of all, do you have to see a fingerprint before you lift it or whatever you call that?
No, sir.
So how do you determine whether or not they're fingerprints you can't see? What do you do?
The base processing methods, again, depend on what technologies the agency has. The simplest and the oldest is dusting with contrasting color fingerprint powder and a brush by just applying it to the surface and dusting it through. If a finger or palm or foot or toe has come in contact with those areas, the secretions from the ridge detail, right, leaves a pattern behind. Those latent fingerprints now become patent or visible. They can be lifted, they can be photographed. They also help tell you what was touched and how things were handled. So it would help in a reconstruction as well.
That's the oldest technology there is, though, right? The throwing dust down, fingerprint dust?
At a crime scene, yeah.
Okay. I'm not talking about going into the lab and using
No.
super glue or whatever. Say, at the crime scene.
Yes, sir.
What is the more modern? Do you use lights or do you use chemicals? What do you do at the scene?
The first method would be to use an alternate light source.
What does that mean?
It could be
Alternate light
anything
source.
from a flashlight held at an oblique angle to see if you can find any smudges or smears, More sophisticated portable laser units. Right? Laser is an acronym for a light source that produces a wavelength of light at a very specific number. The more common today are called the alternate light sources. These are various colored lights, and usually they're light-emitting diodes or LEDs at different wavelengths of light. So in concert with a pair of glasses that are filtered, you can get a shift, and you may be able to pick up fluorescence or luminescence. One of the problems is that our secretions, the oils, the fats, and the salts, don't reflect. They don't give off light. So you would need to process those, if you discovered one, with some type of chemical staining that would act as a fluorescent. And essentially it would be similar to my watch, that when it's dark, it glows.
So are these new technologies, or, I mean, is something space-age stuff, or has it been around for a while?
The light source technology has become simpler and simpler. It's now battery powered. Literally, it's a very simplified flashlight. There are also very sophisticated ones. The technology's been around for about 25, almost 30 years.
Okay, and not uncommon to be available to law enforcement labs?
No, sir. I would expect every laboratory to have some type of alternate light source.
Okay.
And
Now,
the oldest traditional is ultraviolet.
ultraviolet's a black light?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so simple mobile black light you could look at.
Scanning the surface to see if it gives you any information.
Okay. And what if you didn't use the powder or the light, what else? What else could you do?
There's chemical fuming stains that you can use, and the simplest is super glue or cyanoacrylic acetate ester.
Can you do that on a scene?
With a door like that, if I chose to do that, literally you could bag the entire area, place a super glue packet or super glue with an accelerant in it inside the chamber, now inside the plastic bag, and fume the entire door. The other would be to take the door with you and process it
But that
later.
takes a while, doesn't it? The super glue process?
Not necessarily. Okay, half hour, 25 minutes.
Okay. And could you spray it with something else?
Again, the same reagents that we used on the footprints to make those visible, where there was limited amounts of blood-like material, could also be used there.
And you could do that on the door, you could do that on the door frame, you could do that on any object, the methods you've talked about, on any object, literally, in that room.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you see any evidence of any fingerprints, any effort to lift fingerprints, when I say lift, to identify fingerprints in that room or anywhere else on the property that night?
Again, not to the best of my knowledge.
Okay. Let me talk just for a minute about, let me find the one I want. Here we go. How about put 190, stage 195 up, please? Okay, maybe, let's see if we can tune that in a little bit. There we go. Now, how about make it closer? No, the other way. Okay. Tell me what this is, please.
It appears to be a photograph of multiple footwear impressions, three-dimensional renderings in a soft surface.
Okay, and this picture was taken, do you remember who took it?
No, sir, I don't.
Okay. I may have a document here that'll help you with that. I can't remember. Let me suggest this just to cut the chase. You remember reading a statement concerning Solicitor Duffy Stone?
Yes, sir.
Is that picture taken by the solicitor?
I couldn't remember his name. I believe so.
Yes. Okay. And it was taken on the night of June 7th?
That's the indication in the letter.
Okay. So tell me what we're looking at here.
Again, it's a soft soiled surface. Someone or some people have been walking through that area multiple times.
And did you attempt to identify any of those footprints by comparing them?
Just by looking at the basic pattern type, the flat surface ones that have relatively no detail, just the outline of the footwear itself, could be consistent with these sandals that Miss Murdaugh was
Mag
wearing.
Murdaugh was wearing. What about these other shoes?
There were no exemplars that I was made aware of taken by SLED to do a comparison or to try to eliminate them.
Could you tell whether Maggie's shoes were walking over the other footprints, or were the other footprints walking over her imprints?
If those are from Maggie's sandals, they're on top of the other ones. But they're also going in two directions, and some are superimposed over the other.
When you say, okay, let me ask the question this way. Are Maggie's imprints on top of the other imprints, or are they on top of hers?
In the area that they appear, yes.
I'm sorry?
And in the area in which they appear, the answer is yes.
Yes.
They were. They were made there after, right?
Are they on top of Maggie's?
No, Maggie's are on top.
Okay, so the other imprints were there, and Maggie walked on top of them.
Apparently, yes.
Okay. Now, let me see if I can save us some time here. Well, you have also reviewed the SWED procedures manual, correct? Parts of it.
In brief, yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Okay, and let me ask you this. There's certain certifications different labs receive, correct?
Yes, sir. And
the certification SWED receives for their lab, there's an acronym?
The current acronym is ANAB, A-N-A-B.
Okay.
It's the American Board of Accreditation. I forget the last word.
Okay.
But it's a pickup from an older accreditation program that was run under the ASCLD program, the American Society of Crime Lab Directive.
And tell me just briefly how that accreditation program works.
A laboratory or a crime scene unit can apply to this organization for this national, actually it's international, accreditation, which means that they're meeting a minimum criteria and minimum expectations from the parent body. Right? It's a formal recognition, technically, that you're doing a good job, or at least your procedures are well written. The operation manual that I started reviewing was very thorough, was very well written, very easy to understand, but it involves everything from how evidence is processed in the agency, what the responsibilities of the different people are, including the director of the laboratory, the basic procedures and operation of the lab itself, or the crime scene unit, if it's involved in a police department that may not have a formal laboratory. The accreditation is well recognized across the country,
and so they certify that you're meeting the standards, basically.
That you're following the guidelines that you've put, and your guidelines meet a minimum standard, yes.
Okay. So, and have you ever performed these analyses? Have you ever been appointed or assigned by this group to do this?
Yes, sir. Under ASCLD, the precursor to ANAB. I was also one of their auditors, and we would go to different laboratories. In fact, I did the Columbia Sheriff's Department a number of years ago.
Richland County, I'm sorry.
Sheriff's
Department.
I forget.
So, you're very familiar with what the standards are.
Yes, sir.
In reviewing what this file and these pictures and documents, was SWED following the procedures that are required by that certification on this case?
What I had for procedures were their operation manual, how to run the laboratory and the functionalities. There's also a second set of documents called the technical documents for each one of the sections that would further in detail give you the information of how to do things, and as an example, recipes for chemical processing, right? How to put the chemicals together, how to apply them.
Well, they didn't apply any chemicals here.
Again, I didn't see those technical
according
procedures.
to the records. Okay. I guess what I'm saying is, and maybe the easiest way to just get that down to the generic, did they do what they were supposed to do under these standards at this crime scene for most things? Maybe they did some things that we're not aware of, but for instance, you looked at a number of foot impressions, correct?
Yes, sir.
you're required to do the 90-degree and then from different directions, right?
In a best-case scenario, yes.
Did you see any footwear or foot impression that was taken that way?
No, sir.
Okay. All of them were from an angle?
Yes, sir.
And once you do that, are they suitable? I think we even saw...
Objection, leave.
Can't leave the witness.
Any of those photographs, no. Which of any of those photographs met the standards required to do a comparison?
None of the ones from around the victims or in the small shed area.
Okay. How many, if any, had that 90-degree on a tripod, if you will, shot? How many?
None of them.
Okay. And as a result of that, were any of them suitable for forensic comparison?
They were suitable for pattern identification, the gross pattern, but not as far as the detailed individualizing accidental characteristic that might be present.
Okay. Based on the reports we have, what effort, if any, was made to take fingerprints at the scene?
None that I observed.
Okay. Does that conduct, either for the footprints or the fingerprints, meet the standards that you use or anybody else is using when they try to evaluate?
Objection.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the objection.
If anybody else uses. Objection.
Any other department uses, any agency uses, any evaluating agency uses.
There was much more work that could have been done.
Okay. Did they do a terrible job here? He's an expert. I can ask an opinion.
I don't know what their limitations were, and I don't know what the training of the people doing the crime scene processing was. So
I'm not asking you the limitations. Looking at it, did they do a terrible job here? Did they do a less, terrible is the wrong word. Let me get it more scientific. An adequate job to show the absence of, at the minimum, the absence of any other evidence. They do an adequate job to
I don't
eliminate.
believe so.
What?
I don't believe so.
Okay. And that's your expert opinion.
Correct.
Okay.
That much more could have been done.
Okay. And much more being done might have uncovered additional evidence that would have exculpated Alex Murdaugh, helped prove he's innocent. Correct?
Objection.
The basis for the objection.
Speculation.
On response.
Your Honor, it's what, I mean, the key here is the absence of evidence. And certainly the absence of evidence, if there was evidence they could have uncovered that they'd done this process right, it would have helped at the minimum prove there was another person that did this crime.
Speaking response, if you have one.
He's testifying in addition to speculation.
Well, he is testifying.
The objection is sustained.
Thank you. Beg the Court's indulgence one moment. No further questions.
Cross-examination.
Please. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Wouldn't you have loved to have been Laura Rutland?
I'm not sure who Laura Rutland is.
You don't know who Laura Rutland is?
No, sir.
Who Laura Rutland is. It's repetitive.
Mr. Harpootlian asked you if you, and maybe I think he told you, you had read all the records in this case, and you said yes, remember?
No, sir. I've been qualifying that each time he stated it.
I'm sorry, do what?
I have been qualifying that question each time he said that.
Well,
The records that were made available to me,
okay.
the entire case jacket was not made available.
So tell these folks what was made available to you.
Photographs from the coroner's office that were taken apparently by a photographer representing them at the scene. Photographs, I believe, were taken by SLED or an investigative agency. Later, I was the recipient of 4 images, now that I know were taken by the state, well, we call them state's attorneys, district attorney. Copies of the autopsy report, some of SLED's investigative reports, such as the fingerprint section, which actually also did the footwear the footwear examinations. Let's see. I was given access to the operations manual for SLED, right, and the letter that I just referred to as far as the origin of some of the photographs.
So you have not read all the records in this case,
Correct.
and you don't know who Laura Rutland is.
No, sir, I don't.
Would it be important for somebody, well, let me ask you this much. When did you get all that, the reports and the pictures from, when did you receive those in your possession?
Some of them as long as 2 months ago, 3 months ago, others today.
And I spent the weekend looking through some of your background.
Yes, sir.
You provide reports in a lot of cases, don't you?
Yes, sir, I do.
Written reports,
Yes, sir.
what you do, what your findings were, correct?
Yes, sir.
And in fact, you do that in most cases, don't you?
Yes, sir.
Did you do a report in this case?
It was not requested.
Okay, well, so are you taking notes and are you just doing all that from memory up there?
Testimony so far has been more about procedural issues and the specifics of things that I've already reviewed.
I understand that, but that wouldn't answer my question respectfully. Have you done a report for yourself?
Do I have notes that I was taking? Yes. Do I
You
have
have
copies
those?
do I have them with me?
Yes, sir.
Strictly what's on my computer,
You going to provide those to me?
if you wish.
Entitled to reports, not his notes. He's not entitled to Brady. He's not entitled to anything but a report under Rule 5, and there is no such thing.
He just said if you wish. He just told me I
I
could have
didn't
them.
ask for argument. The objection's overruled.
You said I can look at them?
They're not physically here, but whatever I have at another location, you're more than welcome to.
You said you had them on your computer.
Not all the handwritten notes, right? Any of the documentation I was given was by virtue of digital copies.
But you have something on your computer up there. You actually motioned toward it.
Please?
You have some on your computer up there. You
Not the
motioned
actual
toward it.
notes, no. I have the actual documents I received to review. The handwritten notes or any of the notations on images or photographs are at another location.
When did you prepare? We got the PowerPoint last night about 10 o'clock. When did you prepare that?
Which one?
Was there more than one?
There were 2.
Where's the other one?
They were both shown.
Those were 2 PowerPoints?
There were 2 separate ones, yes. I take it back. I was mistaken.
You're what? What'd you just say?
I said I was mistaken.
Okay.
There was one PowerPoint. There were 2 sections to it.
And when did you provide that?
Probably a week ago.
And you just said you were mistaken. You have made mistakes in your life, haven't
Yes, sir. I have an eraser on my pencil.
you? And I'm old school. You're old school. And I don't mean that bad.
Thank you.
And when you were around investigating crime scene years ago, you didn't wear booties every time you were on a crime scene.
When I started doing crime scenes, they weren't part of the equipment.
So
As
my answer-
technology has come along, the fear of contamination, they become standard operating procedures.
But you have not always wore foot protection when you were on a crime scene, have you?
Going back 20, 30, 40 years ago, no, sir.
And you made mistakes before.
As everyone in this room, yes.
Yes, sir. Well, as you just did a minute ago, too. Can I pull up one, whoever's, do you happen to, you mind? Would you pull up something for me? 195, please. If you're not, if I can't, This 195. Can you put that on the wall? Thank you. I didn't mean to. Now, you remember a minute ago when Mr. Harpootlian asked you about states 195?
Yes, sir.
And it's important when these footprints were put on here, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
And you know who first saw those footprints?
No, sir.
You don't. That's right. It's Laura Rutland. Would it have been important to you to come in and you're basically second guessing the Colleton County Sheriff's Department, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division? Well, you're being paid to come in and say they did a bad job, aren't you?
I even qualified that answer. Depending on the limitations of their skill sets, depending on the limitations of equipment that they have and their training, they may have done the best job they could.
But you're second guessing the Colleton County Sheriff's Department and SLED and saying they did a bad job, didn't you?
With that particular image,
Well, no, you've said it about the whole thing.
Have you finished your answer? I'm sorry.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
are you referring to this image or the
Right now,
entire?
okay, yes, sir.
As far as that picture goes, it's a good general overview documentation of an area without additional photographs, which I know there are. There were 4 in the series, if I'm not mistaken. Right. It does show this area in concert with a portion of the crime scene. That can be equated back to one of the diagrams that was prepared. This particular picture is a medium close-up showing a particular area, as I tried to explain with the photography, showing multiple images and how they relate to one another. The other photograph would show how it relates to the scene. The part that's missing are the macro or the close-up photographs showing the detail of the images, so that should a pair of shoes or article of footwear be available, they could then be directly compared and analyzed and either included or excluded from consideration in the case.
And if you had a witness, let me just ask, if you're giving an opinion up here and evaluating the crime scene, wouldn't you want to know if there was a witness who saw this image when there were just the sandals on it? Wouldn't you want to know that if you were evaluating, second guessing whether a law enforcement did a good job? Wouldn't you want to know that?
It would be helpful, but that's not what I was presented with.
You weren't even presented with that.
I was presented with a photograph and asked to interpret what's there.
But if there's a witness who said, I saw those and there were just those sandal prints and nothing else there, you'd want to know that.
First off, I'm not an investigator. I don't do interviews. I don't talk to people about what they did or saw. As a scientist, you evaluate the information that you're given to work with insofar as possible. These images have very limited value for analysis. How they got there, I don't know. An article of footwear came in contact with that surface, as I explained, and left an impression, a 3-dimensional image. As far as who was there, how many people walked through, I don't know. I was not at the scene at the time of the incident, nor have I ever been to the crime scene.
You've never even been in the crime scene.
Correct.
I mean, isn't that important if you're going,
Not for the limited purpose that I was asked to look at the evidence. And as the time had elapsed, there's no way to go back to a scene that occurred 2 years ago and try to interpret evidence that probably no longer exists.
And will you just please answer this one question?
Yes, sir.
If there was information from an individual who saw this scene on June 7th, 21, that when she saw it, there were nothing but the sandal prints and nothing else, wouldn't you want to know that?
Again, as a scientist, I can only deal with what's put in front of me. I avoid witness statements because of their unreliability.
An eyewitness who said, I just saw sandals, you wouldn't want to know that?
I would not care.
Would you care
I'm
about
looking-
you as a beat cop if you just saw sandals yourself?
I was not a scientist at that point. I was not subject to biased accusations, all right, and undue influence from others.
You talking about Mr. Harpootlian or me?
Both.
Okay. And the reason I'm following up on that, and I wasn't clear, Mr. Harpootlian said, were these over other imprints or over? They're actually over each other. The sandals are over themselves, the imprints,
I
correct?
said that, yes.
Okay. Well, it wasn't clear. You're not saying they were over these other.
It may not have been clear to Mr. Meadows. It was clear to me. It was clear to everybody else in the court.
I also stated that they're on top.
Objection is sustained. The
Objection.
objection is sustained. It's examination by the counsel. Cross-examination, not direct examination.
And finally on this topic, Mr. Harpootlian said that these photos were taken on June 7th of 2021, and that's what you thought, correct? That's what you were provided.
The appearance from the letter that was, I believe, attached to those images gave that indication, yes.
Okay. And did it say what? Beg court's note. They were actually taken on June 8th, 2023, later that day. Did you know that?
Apparently, the person who authored the letter authenticating the photograph was inaccurate.
It was March States 565, Mr. Zersi.
Yes, sir.
Do you recognize those?
Yes, sir, I do.
Your Honor, without objection, 565.
No objection, Your Honor.
Admitted without objection.
Now, Mr. Zersi, looking at, I think it states 139, and this now states 565, using common sense, are those consistent with this?
It's the nature of objection.
He's an
The
expert
legal
witness.
basis for the
The
objection.
legal basis is he's applying the wrong standard, common sense. He's a scientist. He can make a comparison scientifically.
The objection is overruled.
In general pattern design, this pair of sandals possibly made the smooth imprints that appear in the picture. However, I cannot tell you size, right, or individual patterns, as the images here, again, were not recorded properly, if that's what they were.
Okay.
There are similarities to basic pattern design to these shoes.
Okay. And you'd have said that, and I'm sorry, you'd have said that as a beat cop 40 years ago, and same thing right now today, wouldn't you?
Except now I have to do it as an expert witness, which is much different.
You're getting paid a lot more.
Yes, sir.
How much are you getting paid an hour?
The base fee was $350 an hour,
I'm sorry?
$350 an hour.
That's the base.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you get paid for travel?
Yes, sir.
How much?
This time, strictly the airfare.
Okay. You don't get paid while you're traveling?
No, I'm not charging for time.
You usually do?
Again, depends on the circumstances.
And you know I got to ask this.
That's okay.
Do you get paid more for sitting in that chair than you do for not being? Inside the courtroom, testimony costs more than outside?
It's the same fee.
$350.
It's a basic 10-hour charge for testimony.
And how many hours have you logged so far?
Total, $20 plus today and, the travel. But I'm not charging for the travel time.
And is there extra charge for the PowerPoint?
No, sir. It's all part of the examination. Multiples of the same Some are multiples of the same print.
I'm going to show you what's marked stakes 559 and 558. Mr. Searcy, do you recognize those?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay. Your Honor, 558 and 559 without objection.
Without objection, Your Honor.
They're admitted.
560 and 561, Mr. Searcy, do you recognize those?
Yes, sir, I do.
Your Honor, 560 and 561 without objection.
No objection, I'm sorry, Your Honor.
They're admitted.
$564,
Yes, sir, I do.
$564 without objection, Your Honor.
They're admitted.
$566,
Yes, sir.
and you're saying yes, sir, that means you recognize them. And
Yes, sir.
566 without objection,
Without objection, Your Honor.
and 557.
Yes, sir.
557 without objection, Your Honor.
Without objection.
They're admitted.
562 and 563.
Yes, sir, I'm familiar with this report and this one.
Your Honor, 562 and 563 without objection.
Without objection, Your Honor.
They're admitted.
And Dr.
Mister,
Apologize.
no problem.
Mr. Searcy. 5-6. And I'll stand back here so everybody can hear. Sorry. 556 and 564 are pictures of Paul's shoes and Alex's shoes, correct?
There are photographs taken at the laboratory of the two articles that you mentioned by ownership, apparently.
Okay. Who've been
With-
identified as Paul and Alex's shoes.
Okay, yes.
Yeah. And then what are these, 561 and 560?
Depending on the methodology that was used, either placing a slurry of ink on the bottom of the shoe, rolling it onto a contrasting surface, i.e. a piece of paper, of both, you have a set of the left and two sets of the right shoe, all right, to try to record any of the detail that would show in a two-dimensional impression when the shoe comes in contact with the surface.
And that's 589 and 559, I believe, are the right shoe, and 560 and 561 are the left shoe of Alex Murdaugh. Would you disagree with that?
No.
Okay. And that's good to do, isn't it?
Yes.
No question about that.
It's part of the examination process.
Take a picture of the soles,
photograph the items,
Do an imprint.
life size, not as represented in those pictures, but yes.
Because you're trying to see if they're characteristics, correct?
If you have something to compare them to, yes.
Class first.
There's 5 criteria: size, shape, wear, pattern, manufacturing, and the final one is individual. The accidental cuts, scratches, gouges, or residue that may be stuck in the bottom of the shoe that would leave a pattern behind.
General class. And then see if you got some kind of individual defect, or I pronate, so that would show on my shoe, wouldn't it?
Yes, sir. And if you supernated, it would too.
Say what? Super, I got you, my bad, I didn't hear you.
Has to do with the way the foot flexes at the ankle.
I understand, I didn't hear you. In 198, 199, already in evidence, would you dispute that these were the right and left of Paul?
They were shown to me as representative of that, yes.
And that's good.
Yes,
I mean, that's good law enforcement.
that's part of the examination process, yes, sir.
And what's now been admitted into evidence, SLED's report by Special Agent Worley, 2 reports, one more detailed than the other, where she basically gave her conclusions about looking at these footwear impressions, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you can't disagree with anything that she came up with, can you?
No, in fact, I agree with her comments about the limitations that were placed on her to do the analysis.
Pretty good examination, wasn't it?
I have no problem with it.
You have no problem with it.
No, sir. In regards to the limitations that were placed on her.
But she tried,
Yes, sir.
and they tried,
Yep.
and they took pictures.
And the pictures that were taken made it difficult, if not impossible, as she states in her report, to draw a positive conclusion in one direction or another, to only be able to give a class characteristic of basic pattern design.
She wasn't basically 90 degrees over it, but the picture was there, still there, correct?
Pardon?
She could still compare these to a picture, couldn't she?
As far as general pattern characteristics, yes.
And I think Mr. Harpootlian showed you some of these. They're out of order, big portion of them. An inked impression and overlay of item 103 shoes, which I think you and I have identified with Paul's shoes, correct?
If that's the number that's on the shoe, yes.
And she compared those to the digital photos, and I think, well, they're in here, this is 38, it's got 105.1. You remember looking at these?
Yes, sir.
And 105.2 and 105.3 inside the feed room?
Yes, sir.
And 105.5. 105.1, right here. And did she make that mark and put it on there, 105.5, 105.1?
Yes.
Okay. And again, that's state 38. What'd she
Again,
say?
to the best of my knowledge, she made that mark.
I understand. What did she conclude about that?
If I could have a report, I'd be happy to read it. Either her report or her work notes, either one.
How about if I hand you this? You ain't got enough room in here, so.
This is from her examination worksheets. Under the
105.1.
Under the accreditation, these notes would have been taken contemporaneous with the examination that she was conducting. All right. Now, there may be a typed transcript of those. And could you repeat which section again?
You got my mark calculator.
There's a mark on 103.2. And you have an underlined section on 105.1.
105.1. You read my underlined section, please.
Strictly that out of context?
No, you read it all. I didn't mean that. You read everything you want. Tell them about what she did. Tell her everything.
No, this is what Agent Worley did. From her examination worksheet dated 6/23/2021, all right, regarding reliability tested, not applied, all right, examination notes, subsection section 105 for item 105.1. Unknown footwear impression in photograph number 0139. Each photograph that was taken has a specific number assigned to it by the digital cameras, so you can go back to that specific image. Near the feed room door threshold. This would be, to me, it's closest to the entryway itself. The item 105, unknown footwear impression, consists of partial impressions in suspected blood on a cement floor. The outsole design consists of at least 4 rows of parallel rectangular blocks. One block is in a row by itself and appears to be 2 blocks that are joined together, forming more of a V or a U shape. Due to the amount of suspected blood, right, in the impression, it is difficult to determine if those or any of the blocks that appear to be joined together are actually joined in the design, or if the volume of suspected blood is masking the separation of the joints. The sentence with the underlined section. Overall, the item 105.1, unknown footwear impression, is consistent with the outsole design of the item 103 right shoe.
That's consistent with Paul's shoe, correct? Assuming Paul's shoe is 103.
It's consistent with that one that's represented, yes.
Thank
you. Okay. Again, this is her opinion.
I understand.
All right. Specifically, the unknown impressions appear to be consistent with the 2nd through the 6th rows of the toe end of the outsole. There is barely a noticeable difference between the design of the left and the right shoe. However, there is a slight variation in the slant of the blocks, especially in the middle row of the impression. Additionally, it is the photograph where, if the photographs were true to size, there is an outline of the blocks that would align with the 5th row of the toe end of the shoe, which is obscured in item 103, left shoe, but is clearly visible in the right shoe. Due to the quality, of the impression, a more meaningful conclusion cannot be rendered. The item 21 and 95 have been eliminated based on the outsole design.
So
those would be Paul's shoes and Maggie's.
So she found that was consistent with Paul's shoe, correct?
Based on her opinion, yes.
Okay. And I'm not going to go through every one of these, but I was just going to briefly go through. Did she also, on the 105.2 footwear impression, say that Paul's shoes were consistent?
And continues, the lack of clarity in the impression makes it difficult to determine if it was made by the left or the right shoe. Therefore, a more meaningful conclusion cannot be reached. And they were eliminated.
It's consistent, correct? The lack of clarity make it difficult to determine a more meaningful, but it's consistent, right? They weren't eliminated. Why'd you say that?
I read the next line.
Yeah, but that's item 21 and 95.
Correct.
You were You were trying to imply that
No, I wouldn't do that.
you made a mistake?
No.
Well, you said they
The
were
last-
doing that. They were-
Standing up, badgering this witness next to him. He can read it. He can comment from back here. He's in the doorway, but again, I object.
For clarity.
This moment.
He's been
The
up here.
objection is to you standing in the doorway.
He's been standing up here the whole
No.
time. Aimed a gun at us yesterday from here.
Are you?
He aimed a gun at us from here yesterday.
For the goose, good for the gander is a rule, and I can't find it in my rule book.
Well, we're operating with limited space. Just as a matter of trial procedures, extremely unusual for counsel to stand in the locations where counsel have been standing throughout the trial. But given the limited space, it's somewhat understandable. But he has moved to the podium. Go right ahead.
Did you misspeak just then?
I did. All right, the last sentence states, the items 21 and 95, the other two articles of footwear, are eliminated based on their outsole design
But Paul's wasn't eliminated.
in a very basic way. And because, again, by her report, by what she reports as the contamination issues, right, blood seeping into other areas, the detail is not there to be definitive. Also, there is no rendering of the size of the image from any of the crime scene photographs. Could it be this big, or could it be this big? I can't eliminate based on size.
And if we could go to 105.3, and I'll stay back here and left you a copy there, and I've got a copy.
Yes, sir.
That's the unknown footwear impression represented.
Your Honor, I'm wishing to tell us what exhibit he's looking. No, I mean, what exhibit you just handed in. What did you just hand in?
To the report that you didn't object to.
I don't object to it, I just don't want to know what it is.
It's photograph 29.
It's 1562.
Thank you.
Sorry. I forgot where we were.
105.3.
Thank you. Under 105.3, can you tell me, which is comparing, I'm looking now in states 40, and do you see 105.3 in states 40, and did you review that when you were evaluating this case? And
I read the reports and matched photographs up to the scene, yes. Or the reports. Whoops, sorry.
And did Agent Worley conclude that item 105.3 unknown footwear impression is consistent with the outsole design of item 103 right shoe? Did she conclude that?
I just,
Oh, I didn't read. I picked it up, but it's still up there. Sorry.
it cannot be,
105.3.
it just says it cannot be excluded.
Did she say impression is consistent with the outside design of 103 right shoe? In the
Although-
second paragraph.
And continuing, although there is minimal amount of detail observed in item 103, right shoe cannot be excluded due to the basic design and structure. Again, the limited amount of detail made a very qualified findings. The other part, continuing on with this document and her final report, they all indicate that there could be no size comparison. And again, there's no way to determine that.
But she tried.
She tried the best she could, yes.
And going on down, 105.4, there was an unknown impression represented on the back of Maggie's leg.
Yes, sir.
I don't even know if he talked about it, but I'm going through 541.
Yes, sir.
What did she say about that? What were her findings?
I believe that she couldn't do anything with it.
Although there's a definite pattern visible, it cannot be definitively determined if the impression is a footwear impression or if it was created by some other object, right?
Correct.
And you agree with that?
Yes.
And the only thing she said it was kind of consistent with was the fabric portion of item 95 sandals. That couldn't be excluded. And those are Maggie's sandals, right? We don't know what it is, right?
Correct.
Sandals,
Could be that. Could be anything.
could be a tire on an ATV.
Possible.
And let's keep going. We're almost through 105.5. And is that comparing the shoes with 557, which has been offered?
What is 557? Okay.
105.5, 105.6. You've looked at this.
The area behind the door. Yes, sir.
You've looked at that. Overall, the item 105.5, unknown footwear, corresponds with the outsole design of item what right shoe?
Item 103.
Let's pause.
Again, these are class identifications. There is very limited detail.
And let's go to the final one here, 105.6. Unknown footwear impression, too partial to determine if it was made by the square diamond pattern of one of the item 21 shoes. Therefore, no conclusion could be rendered. Item 105.6, unknown footwear impression was not made by 95 or 103.
Yes, sir.
She examined every footwear, every one of these, correct? She being Agent Worley?
According to her report, yes, sir.
Took pictures of them, imprints of them,
Yes, sir.
compared them,
Yes, sir. Insofar as she could.
and came up with a report.
Again, I was not requested to write a report.
You don't even have a report.
Correct, sir. I've said that 3 times.
So you have no idea if everything else they didn't provide you was done 100% correctly.
No, sir.
Thank you, that's all.
Very briefly. Let me see if I can do this in less than 5 minutes. He asked you, yes, there's a photograph up here he asked you about in the sand with impressions, shoe impressions, right?
Yes, sir.
So if this Laura Ruttman person that saw this earlier said, all she saw were sandals when she got to the crime scene, and then there were impressions over those sandals, would that indicate that somebody in some way spoiled or affected the crime scene that arrived after the police did, or with the police, or were the police?
After the observation, yes.
Is that something encouraged in these policies and procedures, to actually walk over footprints in the crime scene?
The primary redress at any scene is to protect the evidence, whatever it might be.
Was that protected?
I don't know.
It would appear if one officer saw just sandal impressions, and then after that there are footprints on it, it's not protected.
Objection to leading.
Can't lead the witness.
We'll move on. So you were asked if Agent Worley did all she could do, and you said she tried.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now, she tried with, she even says that the impressions, the pictures of the impressions are inadequate, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that's because they didn't follow the simple procedures you've been doing for the last and most police departments have done for the last 2 or 3 decades, right?
And has been taught for a number of years.
No tripod, no direct angle. And let me ask you this. I believe we've asked this before, but if she had done what you did in that New York crime scene and sprayed a chemical.
Objection, Your Honor.
Question.
I haven't finished. So, if she had sprayed the chemical we saw in the pictures that you had in your PowerPoint from New York, what, if any, difference could that have made?
If there was a blood-like substance present, and more especially in and around the partial prints that were visible, it could give you additional detail and further enhance the pattern design and hopefully give you individualizing characteristics for comparison at a later date. The difficulty with this whole case is I can't tell you when those prints were put there.
You can't tell me what?
I cannot tell you when those prints were there. The only comment that you can make is sometime prior to the time the photographs were taken, the print was placed there.
Okay. And this technology of using that spray is decades old also?
Yes, sir, it is.
So you said she tried. Could she have tried harder? Could she have tried better? Could she have used the techniques that have been around for 20 or 30 years to make sure there wasn't the perpetrator's bloody footprint in the feed room? Could she have done that?
She or someone with their investigative group that would be qualified to do that.
Okay. And he asked you a series of questions. We're on for 10 minutes about she compared this.
Objection.
The objection sustained as to the comment.
Were you asked about a series of report with a series of comparisons of pictures with different known shoe impressions?
Yes, sir.
And I believe you indicate that now if there was a match, what word would be used? Would it be consistent or would it be something stronger?
It depends on the type of analysis and the amount of information that you could call or get from it.
Do you ever say this shoe made that impression?
In an all better world with proper individualizing characteristic and the 5 criteria that I mentioned before, you could reach that conclusion.
Okay. But she says consistent.
Correct.
That's not that shoe made that impression. It's that shoe could have made that impression.
That shoe or any other pattern similar to that could have made it.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Meadows.
Do a second PowerPoint that said that Marco Maggie was consistent with the shoe. Did you do another PowerPoint?
I've done several.
You've done several?
Yes, sir.
Where's the other one?
Chose not to use them.
They chose not to use it. That's all.
You may step down.
Thank you, sir.
We'll take a little break. If you go to the jury room, please do not discuss the case.
exhibit number 145 into evidence. Mr. Metters graciously has agreed to allow me to put it in at this point. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
No objection.
Offered into 145 into.
Submitted without objection.
Do I have to buy you dinner now? Excuse me.
Ready for the jury? Bring them in.
Present, sir.
Thank you. Your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Defense calls Barbara Ann Mixon.
Raise your right hand, left hand on the Bible. Do you affirm the testimony about to give the court in this trial shall be the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Take a seat in the witness stand. You can adjust the mic if you need to. State your name again for the record, please, ma'am.
Ryan Mixon.
And spell your last name.
Mixson.
You have a seat, please. Can we pull that mic close to you? Ms. Mixon, will you tell the jury a little bit about yourself, where you're from, how old are you, and what do you do?
My name is Barbara Mixon, and I'm from Farmville, South Carolina, and I'm a widow. I have 4 daughters, 5 grands, 2 great-grands, and I do housekeeping and care for Miss Elizabeth Murdaugh, and I'm 71 years old.
71 years old. And how long have you been doing housekeeping for Ms. Libby Murdaugh?
42 years.
42 years. And you did housekeeping for Mr. Randolph Murdaugh when he was alive, I take it?
Yes, sir.
And do you know all the Murdaugh children, Randy and Lynn and John Marvin and Ella?
Know them just as good as I know my kids. They are my kids also.
And they're part of your family.
That's right.
Now, are you part of their family?
Yes, sir.
How well do you know Alex sitting here in the courtroom?
Just like I know one of my kids.
And you love him like one of yours?
I sure do.
Okay. Did you know Maggie?
I know her real well. She was like a daughter and a friend.
Did you talk to her frequently?
Every day.
And did you know Paul?
I sure did.
How often would you see Paul?
I would see Paul practically every week. He would come down to see M and Hanson, and then I would be there during the day. And some days he'll come by my house and see me.
Right. And you know Buster?
I sure do.
And he's sitting in the courtroom today?
Yes, sir.
Got a chance to see him?
Yes, sir.
not going to take a whole lot of time, Ms. Mixon, but we just give the jury a little bit of a understanding of how frequently Alec would go by and check on his mom and dad over, say, the last 10 years.
Practically every day when I'm there. I see them every day, and I'm there Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. Sometimes I have to work on Saturday and Sunday, and he would come by.
And what time of day, I guess, the hours that you worked over at, did you call the place Almeida, or do you call it Almeida?
Yes, sir.
And what are your normal hours there at Almeida?
8 to 3.
And it's always been 8 to 3 for?
8 to 3, always.
And you took some time off when your husband was sick, and then you went back to work. You remember when you went back to work?
My husband passed on January the 2nd of 2019, and I went back to work in August of 2019.
And during that period of time, you were working 8 to 3?
8 to 3.
Okay. And I think you said Alec would come by frequently to check on his mom and dad?
Yes, sir.
Would Maggie come with him?
Well, not through the week. I mostly see Maggie like on Fridays, or she might stop by like that. But Lily will come through the week by herself.
Okay. And I think you mentioned Paul would visit?
Yes, sir.
Just want to go to June 7th. You remember that awful day, Ms. Mixon?
Yes, sir.
Did you talk to Maggie that day?
I talked to her on June. I talked to her on June the 9th. I think it was between 7 and maybe 7:30.
June the 7th is when she was murdered.
That's right, June 7th.
And you talked to her that evening?
Yes, sir.
And you remember what y'all talked about?
Yes, sir.
What did you talk about?
She said, Barbara, I was trying to reach you before I left to go to Somerville. I had to take my mama to the doctor, and I couldn't get a hold of you. But I am going to fix supper for the Murdaughs and for your family for Wednesday night. Because Thursday, I got to go take my daddy to the doctor. And she said, oh, Barbara, I'm going to call you back. She said, no, hold on a minute. That either Elliot or Buster calling me. She said, I tell you what, I'll call you back when I unload the car. And I never got the call back.
That the last time you talked to her?
Yes, sir.
And the last conversation you had with her, she was planning to make you dinner. Is that right?
Dinner for me and her in-laws.
What was happening on June the 7th? Do you remember Mr. Randolph, what his situation was?
Well, John Marvin came to take Mr. Randolph to the doctor. And, you know, I remember that part because he was real sick.
And after John Marvin took Mr. Randolph to the doctor, you remember that Mr. Randolph got checked into the hospital that day?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you remember calling Alec?
Yes, sir.
On the afternoon of June 7th?
Yes, sir.
And what did you talk about?
Objection, hearsay.
What did you talk about?
Objection's overruled.
What did you talk about, Ms.
Oh, I called Elliot. Well, first I called Chrissy. I always call Chrissy first. I couldn't get Chrissy. So then I said, well, let me call Elliot. So I called Elliot. I said, Elliot, your mom is very agitated. She is crying. I give her medicine, and I want you to come check on her later on during the day. And he said, okay, I will.
Was Ms. Libby agitated?
Because Mr. Randolph had done gone to the hospital.
But and she was in fact agitated, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And what do you mean by agitated?
Well, she was crying a lot, and I couldn't get her to eat, and she just, you know, she just agitated. She wasn't.
And I'm going to show the exhibit that's in evidence. Doug, if you could pull up the State's Exhibit 520 and go to page 21, which is the Rudolphski extraction long version. Ms. Mixon, can you see there's an entry on this timeline at 3:58:39. Alex Murdaugh received an incoming call from Barbara Mixon. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
You think that's when you called Alec?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that is on June the 7th, for the record. All right, you can take that down, Doug. How'd you learn about Maggie and Paul?
Well, I was sitting on my porch, and my daughter, which she's in the courtroom, Shirley, Officer Stacy Lord Hope came and pulled up. Shirley, my daughter, which in the courtroom, she jumped out of her car and told me to say, Elliot found Maggie and Paul dead.
So a police officer came to your house.
Two of them. It was Stacy Lord Hope and then another one. And I said, could I go out there? And they said, no, you couldn't go out there.
Okay. And Ms. Mixon, that was a Monday night, and do you remember Mr. Randolph dying on a Thursday, passing on a Thursday?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and that was June the 10th.
Yes, sir.
And do you remember that the funeral for Maggie and Paul was that Saturday? Do you remember the funeral service at the graveyard for Maggie and Paul on that Saturday?
Yes, sir.
And then Mr. Randolph's funeral was on that Sunday. You remember that?
Yes, sir.
And the next day was a Monday. Did you work that day?
Yes, sir.
And what time did you come to work?
8 o'clock. Well, about 5 minutes to 8.
And who did you relieve?
Shirley Smith.
Okay, so Shelley would have worked the night shift, and you came on at 5 till 8?
Yes, sir, and release, sir.
And did you work that Tuesday?
Yes, sir.
And what time did you get to work?
5 minutes to 8.
And were you relieving Ms. Shelley Smith?
Yes, sir.
And what about that Wednesday?
I released Shirley Smith 5 minutes to 8.
All right. And Ms. Mixon, on any of those days, Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, when you relieved Ms. Shelley Smith, did you see a tarp opened up anywhere in Ms. Libby's house?
No, sir.
No blue tarp? You see no blue tarp on a rocking chair?
No, sir.
Have you ever seen a blue tarp laid out in the house?
I never seen a blue tarp laid out in the house. Never.
And you relieved Ms. Shelley
Yes,
every
sir.
day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of that week?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you. That's all the questions I have here.
By the state.
Very briefly. Afternoon, Ms. Mixon. How you doing?
I'm doing good. And you, sir?
Been better, been worse? We met a few weeks ago.
Yes, sir.
You remember down at the,
Yes, sir.
not far from here.
Yes, sir.
You love Alex.
I love all of them.
You love
They
them.
like my children.
They like your family.
Yes, sir.
And we talked about that day before, briefly. You remember that day, the 7th, like he just asked you. We talked about what you did that day and who you talked to, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you didn't tell us about that conversation you had with Alex that day, did you?
No, sir.
Okay. When, have they talked to you about that recently? When's the first time you told anybody about that?
I can't remember, but I can't remember. It's been a little while. I can't remember.
That's all. Thank you.
Anything further?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. You may step down.
Your Honor, may this witness be excused?
Yes.
Thank you.
Every witness 2 steps down is excused.
Thank you.
Next witness.
Your Honor, this defense calls Micah Sturgis.
Raise your right hand, left hand on the Bible. Do you affirm the testimony you're about to give the court shall be the truth, so help you God? I do. Thank you. Take a seat in the witness stand. You can adjust the microphone when you seat if you need to. State your name again for the record, please, sir. Sure. Spell your last name.
Micah Sturgis, last name Sturgis.
Good afternoon, Mr. Sturgis.
Good afternoon.
To start with, can you just tell us about yourself? Where are you from?
Sure. My name is Micah Sturgis. I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina. I am the Director of Digital Forensics for Barefoot Professional Investigations.
Pull the mic a little closer.
Sorry. Better? Yeah. I'm the Director of Digital Forensics for Barefoot Investigations.
Okay. And tell us about your experience in law enforcement and then cell phone forensics.
Sure. So from 2004 until 2016, I was employed by the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office. It's a full-service sheriff's office located in Cleveland County, North Carolina. They're on the border of North and South Carolina. During that time period from 2004 to 2006, I was a patrol deputy. In 2006, I was promoted to a corporal or training officer, where I trained new hires. In 2009, I was promoted to detective. In that capacity, I handled everything from larcenies to murders, and then I took on the role of the digital forensic examiner for the sheriff's office. It was the first one that we had, and I formed the digital forensics lab at the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office.
And before we get more into digital forensics, you've been involved in murder investigations before?
I have, yes.
Okay. As a lead detective?
As a lead detective, yes.
And then as you go into digital forensics, tell us about your experience with digital forensics in law enforcement, and then afterwards, and then after that we'll get to your certifications and training.
Sure. As the digital forensic examiner for the sheriff's office, it was my responsibility to handle all the digital evidence that came into the lab, and I was also in charge of ordering things that needed to be ordered and stocked up on for digital forensic purposes. And during that time period, I was sponsored by the United States Secret Service to attend the National Computer Forensics Institute in Hoover, Alabama, where I was trained in mobile device examination, multiple tools, Celebrite, Blackthorn, which is a form of burla ivy, XRY, which is another forensics tool, Paraben was another tool that we used, and so I received that training from the NCFI. They also sent me back with several things, one of which being a laptop computer or a MacBook in order to do examinations on, and also a Ramsey's box or a Faraday box that I used to use whenever we had phones that came in.
And let's just, since we're kind of on it, could you go through the training you've had in digital evidence?
Sure. So I have had the basic and intermediate cell phone forensic courses, introduction, intermediate, advanced, computer forensics, internet investigations, introduction to wireless investigations. I was a Lantern certified examiner, attended the Lantern cell phone training. Lantern is a forensics tool for Apple devices, primarily Apple devices, does some Androids. Apple iOS forensics, I attended that at the American Academy of Applied Forensics in Charlotte. Cyber investigations, I was nominated and sent to the National Computer Forensics Institute by the United States Secret Service, where I received my mobile device examiner certification. I also received Celebrite certifications while there at the NCFI, and Paraben mobile forensic training, Celebrite certified physical analyst, received XRY training at the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and took the XRY intermediate courses. In 2017, I attended the Infuse conference in Las Vegas, Nevada, where I sat for my ENC written examination. Later came back to Charlotte and did the practical examination, where I was certified as an in-case certified examiner in 2017. And attended the Magnet User Summit a couple of times, received some training on their tool there at one in Las Vegas, the other in Nashville, and received introduction to alternate data acquisition training, wireless analysis training. I received my Lantern certified examiner from Katana Forensics, my XRY certified examiner from MSAB, the Celebrite mobile forensics fundamental certification, the Celebrite certified operator certification, Celebrite physical analyst certification, and then the Celebrate Certified Mobile Examiner certification, and also my in-case certified examiner certification.
And can you tell us about how many extractions or acquisitions of digital evidence you performed?
Sure. Well over 500 logical physical acquisitions and extractions using Lantern, the Apple device, forensic tool, Celebrate, Blackthorn, XRY, Paraben, and over 750, well over 750 images of hard disk drives or solid state drives of computers, and analyzing that data within either FTK or in-case. FTK's Forensics Toolkit. It's a forensic suite. Examined it in in-case, Magnet IEF, which is Internet Evidence Finder. That's what they started out as. They're now Magnet Axiom is the product that they produce and put out. So I've used Axiom to do multiple examinations with that. Imaged with hardware forensic imagers like the Forensic Falcon. I've used Paladin to get live acquisitions, Macquisition for Macs, and Recon ITR for MacBooks. Also had to collect checkpoint encrypted devices with my time at the bank.
And that leads into, when did you leave law enforcement and what have you done since you left?
Sure. In 2016, I received a phone call from an individual who owned a private firm in Charlotte, and I went to work for him as a digital forensic examiner in the South Park area of Charlotte.
Okay. And after?
After that, I worked for him from 2016 until roughly 2019, and then I went to Wells Fargo, where I was one of 24 examiners for the Wells Fargo and Company. After leaving Wells Fargo in 2021, I went and formed this lab at Barefoot Professional Investigations.
And have you ever been qualified as an expert by court to testify before?
Yes, I have in both criminal and defense work.
Okay. Criminal work, civil cases?
And civil as well, yes.
And in the criminal cases, have you been on the defense side, the prosecution side, both sides?
I've been on both.
Okay. Have you ever been qualified as an expert in digital forensics in a murder case before?
I have, yes, in 2015.
And was that for the prosecution?
It was for the prosecution.
Your Honor, at this time I would offer the witness as an expert in cell phone forensics.
No objection, Mr. Davis.
So qualified.
Mr. Sturgis, before we get into the what we're here to talk about, are you paid by the defense to be here?
I am.
And how much?
My rate is $300 an hour for any type of examination work or consultation, and then $600 an hour to be on the stand.
And does that go to the company that employs you?
It does.
In your experience, are you aware of anyone who does this work for free for the defense?
No, I'm not. In fact, I do IDS work.
What's that?
IDS work is indigent service, so people who can't afford defense experts, and I do that work, and the state pays me.
Turning to this case, have you? What information have you reviewed regarding the cell phones in this case?
Everything that I've been able to look at and review has been provided by the state.
And specifically the extractions, where
Right,
they're from?
specifically the extractions of the mobile devices and reports that they've produced.
So you haven't done anything independent of what the state has provided?
No, only the state's data.
Okay. And have you had a chance to review the timeline that's been introduced into evidence in this case? I believe it was, I don't have the exhibit number on me, but the large timeline of events.
The one provided by the state, yes.
And as far as the cell phone information goes, is that timeline accurate?
It is there, with the exception of a couple of things based off interpretation of the data, but for the most part, yes, it is accurate.
Is anything missing?
There are two instances where there's some things from the Knowledge C database that aren't in the report that I've been able to locate and identify.
Okay, and we'll later on get to that, but we won't have to belabor it because we'll just sort of be filling in those gaps. But there are 3 phones here. Paul, Alec, Maggie Murdaugh. What did you do with Paul's phone, if anything?
With Paul's phone, the extraction reports that I received, there wasn't much data after 8:49, somewhere in that time, on 6/7. So I didn't really focus much on that one. With Alex's phone, that one reviewed the steps that were there in the Apple Health sections. And with Maggie, I really focused my attention on Maggie's.
Okay. And so we'll focus on her phone. Was there any GPS data on her phone?
There was GPS data, but there was nothing from 6/7.
Remember when the GPS data started?
It was 6/9.
Okay. And you mentioned when talking about, I think, your qualifications, Faraday bags or boxes. What are those?
So a Faraday bag or a Faraday shield is something that completely takes the device off the network. It also prevents GPS signal from reaching the device and changing data to the device.
You could describe your experience working with those in law enforcement?
Sure. So part of my responsibility when I worked at the Sheriff's Office as head of the Digital Forensics Lab was to make purchases. So I would purchase these Faraday bags for our patrol officers. So when they came out on scene and came across, if we had an instance of a crime where a phone was used and they needed to seize that phone, they had access to those bags, either in their cars or back at the office in the shared vault room where they could go in and put their evidence up. And if it's a good bag, which, if you buy the right bag and the phone's put in there the proper way, then it prevents signal from reaching the phone.
And then, did you mention a box?
Yes, so it was a Ramsey's box, is what I called it. The Secret Service provided that to me when I left their training. And with that box, what I would do is I'd take the phone from the Faraday, or from evidence that was in the Faraday bag wrapped up, put it inside the Faraday box, or the Ramsey's box. It has 2 gloves that I'd shove my hands into. My computer and the forensic software would be plugged into the side of the Ramsey's box. It was a powered box. There was a light on the inside, so it had a window I could look into, and then I could manipulate the bag and open it up and pull the phone out and keep everything in that Faraday shield.
In your opinion, if Maggie Murdaugh's phone had been secured in the way you just described, would it have GPS data from 6/7?
It likely would have.
Can we show what's been admitted as State's Exhibit 278? Can we show what's been admitted as State's Exhibit 278, please? And can we see the top of the screen? Sir, do you know what the little arrow in the top left of the phone screen is?
That's the locations. I'm sorry. That's a location services arrow.
And I probably should have asked first, this was admitted as a photo of Maggie Murdaugh's phone in the lab before the extraction. Have you seen this before? Do you recognize it?
Yes, I have.
And again, that arrow indicates...
Yes, that location services are active on the device, even though the phone's in airplane mode.
Does that mean that right there in the lab it's writing GPS data?
Yes.
You can take that down. I'll show you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 156. I'll ask you if you recognize that.
I do. This is Alex Murdaugh's steps and Maggie Murdaugh's steps from the Apple Health data.
Your Honor, I would offer, I believe, without objection, Defendant's Exhibit 156 in evidence.
No objection.
Submit it.
Pull up. It's the Apple. want to just ask you to explain what some of these terms are. How does, and obviously from the title this is Alex Murdaugh's phone, how does the phone come up with that steps number?
So there are accelerometers.
Mike,
I'm
a
sorry.
little closer, please.
I hope I sit up a little further. There's accelerometers inside the device. So whenever the phone is jostled or moved and there's the accelerometers move, then that accelerometer data logs a step. So independent upon where the device is, if it's on your waist or in your pocket or you're holding it in your hand when you're walking, that movement of the accelerometer indicates those steps.
And what does, how does it come up with the distance that corresponds with those steps?
It uses the satellite's GPS.
And what does the start and stop times, what do they mean?
So in the Apple Steps or Apple Health data here, you see, for instance, entry 26, that the between the times of 7:55:32 and 8:05:07, that 270 steps were taken during that time period.
Okay. Now, do we know when in that time period the steps occurred?
We know that the steps or the logging of those steps started at 7:55 and 32 seconds, but whether we don't know each individual step, when each individual step took place. We just know that sometime during that time frame, those 270 steps were taken.
And between the steps numbers and the distance, do you have an opinion on which one is maybe more accurate?
In my opinion, the steps are going to be more accurate.
Why is that?
Because of the accelerometer and the hardware in the phone, they're more accurate.
Does that mean that the distance is not useful information?
It doesn't mean the distance isn't useful information. I think the totality of everything altogether is what we have to look at here.
Go to the second page. And is this the same thing for Maggie Murdaugh's phone?
It is.
Before we get into time, just some other things to cover. There's been a lot of talk so far about orientation changes. You can take that down, that exhibit. What is an orientation change on an iPhone?
So an iPhone has two orientations. It has a portrait or up and down, or a landscape, which is horizontal or sideways. And whenever whenever the device is backlit, that's when the orientation change will log and show. Now, we're not specifically talking about like a phone. If you physically take the phone and turn it like this, we're not talking about the physical.
I'm going to just interrupt a second. I know they don't let you have a phone, but since you're gesturing,
thank you.
There's a phone that might.
So what we're talking about is not the physical positioning of the phone, but the orientation of the data that you're reading on the device, that orientation change.
And what do the start and end times mean for an orientation change?
So when a orientation change is made, a start time is logged. That's the start time of the orientation change that you're seeing on the device itself.
And for Maggie's phone, what was the last orientation change? When was that?
I believe that was 9:06 and 12 seconds p.m. on 6/7.
And when did that one end or complete?
I believe that was 9:06 and 20 seconds.
And when it completed, what was the orientation of the phone for the rest of the time?
It was in portrait mode.
Okay. If the screen is off, can an orientation change occur?
If the screen is off, no, the orientation change can't occur.
If the orientation change happens in the database at the exact moment the screen comes on, does that tell you anything?
When I see that, when I see a orientation change at the exact time that the screen is lit up, if the device was in horizontal or landscape mode and then moved into portrait mode and the screen comes on, then all of a sudden, the exact same time, it changes into portrait mode. To me, that indicates that the phone was in a portrait mode position, and then the screen comes on, and then the orientation change takes place inside the phone.
So does that mean that movement when the screen is off can appear as an orientation change when the screen comes on?
When the screen comes on, yes. When the screen's backlit, that's when the orientation change. It cannot make an orientation change unless the back screen's lit.
So kind of moving on then to, we've talked about orientation changes and they don't happen when the screen is off, as you said. Can motion of the phone turn on the screen?
Yes. Very little motion can turn on a screen.
And what is the raise to wake feature on that?
So the Apple has a raise to wake feature that's set by default. Currently, this phone, and unfortunately you can't see there.
Well, could you, if the court's permission, could you come down to show the jury?
Currently, the phone is off. Now it's on. See that small movement. Can I put it right here? No? Okay. The slight raising of the phone will indicate. So when the phone's here, if you raise the phone, it raises the weight. So if you raise the phone like that, if the phone's flipped over, you flip the phone back over, it wakes up. If you move the phone from this mode to here, the phone comes on. So that's the raise the wake function.
And was this feature turned on Maggie Murdaugh's phone on June 7th?
By all indications on the database, there were that it was there. Yes.
Okay. Are you familiar with the location of Maggie Murdaugh's phone when it was covered by law enforcement on 680?
I am.
And have you reviewed the recently received GPS data for Alex Murdaugh's Suburban when it was passing that location?
I did.
Okay. So do you know when the Suburban passed the location of the phone?
When it was leaving the house where the crimes took place, it was around 9:08. When it was passing the location where that phone was located, and then on the return trip back, it was 9:59, I believe 19 seconds.
Was Maggie Murdaugh's phone screen off during those times?
Yes.
Now you're just here as a cell phone expert, right?
That's correct.
So can you offer any expert opinion on how a phone would tumble or bounce or move when thrown from a car going 40 plus miles an hour, into the brush in the side of a country road?
No, there's just too many variables, and I'm not an expert on physics. So.
Can you tell us how much motion would be required for the screen to come on a phone?
Very little. Just reaching and picking this phone up like I just did there, the phone comes on. So very little.
Okay. And again, in the times that Alex Murdaugh's car was passing, the screen never came on.
That's correct. The database indicated it was off.
Turn to Maggie Murdaugh's phone.
Show you what's been marked distance in. It's 158. Do you recognize this?
I do.
And what is it?
This is a PowerPoint presentation printed off that you put together, but it's based off of the Knowledge Seed database data.
And to be clear, I typed it into PowerPoint. Have you reviewed every slide in that presentation?
I have.
Have you verified the data on every slide?
I have.
And you've confirmed independently the data on every slide?
Yes.
No objection.
Your Honor, I would offer, it's been marked as defendants 158 into evidence. So I'm going to go through this. No, don't zoom the screen. So we're looking at just a very short period of time All right, can you describe the time period you're looking at?
Yes, this is on June 7th, from 8:49 p.m. until 9:07 p.m.
All right, so we're going to go through here and just see exactly what was happening with her phone on that time. So it's the next slide, please. And what's happening here?
At 8:49:26
You can pull the mic closer, please.
Sorry. At 8:49:26, that's the last text message that was read by Maggie. It was indicated read on the device.
Next.
At 8:49:28, the backlight goes off.
And what does that mean?
That means that
The screen?
the screen's dark. Yeah, sorry.
And next.
At 8:49:31, the phone locks, and it remains locked until it's recovered by law enforcement the next day.
Next.
At 8:53:08, the backlight comes back on. The phone's eliminated.
And next.
And 8:53:12, orientation to portrait starts.
Next.
At 8:53:15, that's when the phone began logging the 59 steps.
Next.
And
it's on the screen. And
yep, sorry. And at 8:53:20, there's Siri usage. This was indicated in the Knowledge C database, and that can be done by squeezing the side button, holding on to it for a short period of time, and Siri activates at that point.
So this is a user interface,
Yes,
somebody squeezing a button.
it actually shows up as Siri UI, so it's a Siri user interface.
Next.
At 8:53:24, the orientation to portrait completes.
Next.
At 8:53:28, the backlight goes off again, so the phone's dark.
Next.
At 8:53:32, the backlight comes back on the phone and eliminates.
Next.
At 8:53:44, the backlight goes off again.
Do you have any opinion about why it just popped on and off like that?
I mean, there were no indications in the Knowledge C database that any notifications came in or anything of that nature. The only thing I could think would be that the phone were jostled or lifted, or somehow the light came on.
And next.
At 8:54:32, the backlight comes on.
Next.
At 8:54:34, there's an entry in the Knowledge C database about the camera usage. Camera starts. So in that, there are in that database, and if you don't mind, I'll kind of expand on this. In that database, the Knowledge C database is comprised of tables and rows and columns. And in that database, on that specific item where the camera was, there is another column that is called the Z-structured metadata. And so if I follow the camera under the value string there, indicating that the camera was activated, if I follow that line all the way across to where that structured database is, structured metadata is in that table, I'll get a PK number, a primary key number. That number was 571. In the Knowledge C database, there's another table within the Knowledge C database called Z structured metadata. So if I go to that table, because I found that number under the Z structured metadata column, if I go to that specific table in the database and look for that primary key 571, and I scroll all the way out to the end, I'll see a description of what that 571 is. And in that case, here, it was com.apple.springboard.lockscreen.scroll, which would indicate that it was a camera function on the lock screen, and that when you press that button in the bottom right corner of the phone that has the little camera indication, it'll scroll over to a camera, or you can swipe over from the left, and then it indicates that there's a camera there.
So was this some sort of attempt by the phone on its own at Face ID?
It didn't indicate that it was a Face ID at all. It indicated that it was a camera.
And by indicated cameras, did it indicate that someone was a person using the phone activated the camera?
Yes.
Okay. Next.
At 8:54:35, the camera use ends.
Okay. And keeping in mind the time stamp, Go to the next slide.
And at 8:54 and 40 seconds, the orientation to landscape starts.
Okay. And so how long was that since the camera usage?
About 5 seconds since it ended.
Next slide.
And then at 8:54 and 44 seconds, the orientation to landscape ends.
And next.
At 8:55 and 4 seconds, the backlight turns off and the orientation to portrait starts.
Now, lots happening on this one. What's happening here?
Yep. So right here, the phone was previously in landscape mode, and it settled in at that landscape mode at 8:44 seconds. The backlight went off at 8:55 and 4 seconds. At that same time, the orientation of portrait starts, and that's this is indicative of what I was talking about earlier. When you rotate the phone while it's in the screen's not lit, and then the screen comes on, and the orientation changes once the screen pops on. It'll flip over to wherever camera or wherever the phone is turned to. At this time, orientation to portrait ends at that time, and the orientation to the landscape starts at that time. So that's exactly what I was talking about. And then the phone stops logging those 59 steps at that time as well.
I'm going to kind of emphasize this. Could we go back 4 slides? All right. So when the camera use ends here, 8:54:35, going forward, one slide, we have an orientation change.
That's correct. To the landscape starts, yes. Orientation to the landscape ends at 44 seconds after.
And then the next slide. So now that the screen has gone off, how long has it been since the camera use?
Let me go back in my. So it's 8:55 and 04. Since the camera use ended at 8:54 and 35, and then the backlight goes off at 8:55 and 4 seconds. So, what is that, a minute?
Is that 29 seconds?
Hang on, sorry. Yeah, it's 29. I apologize. My math was terrible, wasn't it? Yes.
And then going forward, so what we had in that 29 seconds was an orientation change, and then the screen goes off.
Right, that's correct. Where are we going with it now? It just split the slide on me.
All right, so let's go back to the slide that's timestamped 8:55:32. Is this where we left off?
That's where we left off, yes. So here the backlight's on, the orientation of portrait ends, and then the orientation to landscape starts immediately when the backlight comes back up on the phone. And then the phone stops logging those 59 steps at that time as well.
And the next slide, 4 seconds later.
4 seconds later, the backlight's back off again.
Okay. Now we'll go kind of quickly here. The next slide comes on.
9:03, the backlight's on. At 9:04 and 23, we have a missed call from Alex that starts. At 9:04 and 23, the backlight goes off.
But now let's go back to the previous slide.
One more.
The backlight went off at the exact same time that a call came in from Alex Murdaugh.
That's correct, yes.
And now the next slide.
And then we have a missed call from Alex that ends.
That's the
at
call
9.
we just saw, right, ending.
Yes.
Do you have an opinion on why the screen light would go off pretty much right when a call comes in?
The only thing that I could figure is when the phone came in, the call came in, that the person hit the side button to turn it off and then put it down or flip the phone over.
Do you know of anything on the phone that would cause the screen to go off right when a call comes in and stay off during the call that does not involve human interaction with the phone?
No, I don't.
I'll go to the next slide.
9:05 and 44 seconds, the backlight comes back on. And at 9:06 and 12 seconds, an orientation change to portrait begins.
Okay. And the next one, and we'll stop on that.
At 9:06 and 14 seconds, there's an incoming call from Alex that starts at that time.
And then the next one,
And then the incoming call from Alex ends at 9:06 and 18 seconds.
and the next slide.
And then we have an orientation change to portrait ends at 9:06 and 20
And
seconds.
stopping here, that call we just saw coming in from Alec, that was sandwiched within this orientation change.
That's correct, yes. It was in between them.
And next slide.
9:06:52, we have another incoming call from Alex that starts,
And the next one.
and then it ends, the incoming call from Alex ends at 9:06 and 59 seconds.
Now the last slide.
At 9:07, the backlight goes off and it remains off until 9:31 and 44 seconds.
And do you know from your review of the GM GPS data where the Alex Murdaugh Suburban was at 9:07?
Yes, at 9:07, he was, it was like traveling from the house, or from his home to the house in, I forget the name of the city.
Like right, precisely at 9:07, where was he at that moment?
The 9:07 would be the driveway, I believe.
Right, the driveway.
Yes.
And Maggie's phone, the screen did not come on again until 9:31.
That's correct.
And just one more time, how much motion does it take to turn the screen?
Very little. I mean, just the slightest lift of the phone turns the screen on.
The court's indulgence. Please answer any questions from the state. I have no further questions. And before that,
Don't forget your phone.
Conrad? Please, Lord. Mr. Sturgis, how you doing today?
Good afternoon, Mr. Conrad. I'm well, thank you.
I believe at the beginning of your testimony, you testified that you felt it likely there was some location data stored on Maggie's phone from June 7th that potentially was overwritten. Did I understand that correctly?
I said that there was data that was on the phone from June 8th, and that, correction, June 9th, and that data likely could have been on there had it been preserved properly.
And explain to the jury just real quick, how does an iPhone store that GPS information? In generic terms, and then if I need to get more specific, I will.
Sure. So the iPhone keeps that data, and it uses the GPS location. The GPS satellite triangulates with the GPS satellites, and it stores that data.
Right. And does it store it in a sort of cache?
It does.
All right.
It is a cache.
And when it comes to iOS, as opposed to, say, a standard hard drive, iOS keeps certain databases caches fairly limited, correct? And
That's
doesn't
correct.
allow them to access the entire memory available on a device at any given point, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And do you know, or at least in your training or your investigation, have you been able to determine just how big a typical cache is, at least would have been for Maggie's phone during this time?
No, I didn't research that. No.
Okay.
No, I didn't research that. No.
Okay, so you don't know how long Maggie's phone would have potentially stored GPS information at this during 2021, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
No.
All right. And just so I understand correctly, you agree that a iPhone will not record an orientation change if the screen is off, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
All right. So I believe Mr. Barber handed you his phone to kind of demonstrate this lift to weight thing, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And do you know what model iPhone Mr. Barber has? Did you look at it?
Don't know exactly which iPhone he has.
Okay. And do you know what version of iOS is on Mr. Barber's phone?
I do not know.
And Apple updates its iOS fairly frequently, correct?
They do, yes.
Do you know, at least, we don't know what's on Mr. Barber's phone, but do you know what the current release version is today?
It's 16 point something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know in your review of Maggie's phone what version was on Maggie's phone on June 7th of 2021?
I believe that was 14 point something.
I'm sorry.
I think it was 14.6, if I'm not mistaken. It was somewhere in the 14 range.
And are you aware that in some of these iOS updates, some of these sensitivities and some of these settings can change, correct?
Depending on bug fixes and things, yes.
And are you aware of a change that occurred in iOS 15 that changed how iPhones record orientation changes, or when they record orientation changes?
No, I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Okay. Can we go back to I forget, let's see, the PowerPoint? What exhibit was that? I believe it was it 155? Were there two? I just was aware of one. You 158? This one. And this doesn't have a slide number, so bear with me. But first of all, before we talk about Maggie real quick, you did review Paul's phone to a certain degree, correct?
To a certain extent, yes.
All right. And do you recall from your review of Paul's phone when the last time his phone was unlocked on June 7th of 2021?
I don't recall, no, I'm sorry.
And we can find the state's exhibit if we need to, but would you disagree if I told you it was 8:49 p.m. or shortly thereafter?
If that's what's in the state's exhibit, I don't disagree with that.
Okay. And I believe one of your first slides here is that Maggie's phone locked. Let's see, go to 1, 2, 3 slides. One more. All right, back one, I'm sorry. 8:49:31, and in your review of Maggie's phone found that her phone was locked at 8:49:31, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And it was not unlocked until when, the next day?
The next day, that's correct.
All right, and that's when it was recovered by law enforcement?
By law enforcement, yes, sir.
Okay. And did you review Alex's? You said you reviewed Alex's phone to a certain degree too. I think you said the steps, right?
The steps, yes.
And in your review, did you find any steps on his phone between 8:09 and 9:02 p.m.?
Let me go back and take a look at that. (8:09 and 9:02 p.m.) Correct. No, I don't recall seeing that. I'm seeing the stuff in the knowledge C here.
Okay. All right. But Maggie's phone's locked at 8:49:31, and it does not unlock till the next day, correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
Paul's locked for the last time around the same time, correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
And Paul's phone, in your review, to recall what time the battery died on his phone?
I don't recall, no, sir.
Would you dispute me if I said, and we can find the exhibit if we need to, his phone shut down at about 10:34 p.m.?
If that's what's in the report, I don't dispute it, no, sir.
All right. And would you agree with me if I said that Paul's phone locking at 8:49 and remaining on until 10:34, first of all, that's about, what, hour and a half or so?
That's correct, yes.
And do you know his battery state when his phone locked at 8:49 p.m.?
It was in low power mode.
So it was less than 10%, 2%, something like that?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. And would you agree with me when the fact that his phone remained on until 10:34 would be indicative that it wasn't really handled much at all or used at all?
Yes.
Okay. And did you find any other evidence of any usage on Paul's phone after 8:49 that you can recall?
No, I didn't.
Okay. And when I say use, just so it's clear between us, I mean either answering a call, making a call, reading a text, sending a text, orientation change.
And no user interaction with it.
All right. And so let's talk a little bit about the orientation change for a minute. So would you agree that the most likely reason for an orientation change is human interaction, meaning humans using the phone?
Yes.
All right. Are there any other possible explanations when you see an orientation change? Are there any other explanations that you, in your opinion, that could explain an orientation change?
Only if a phone, was in one position, lit up, fell off, and landed in another position.
Okay.
But no.
And when you see a series of orientation changes, 30 seconds or a minute between each orientation change, it'd be difficult to explain that by a phone just kept falling on its own, correct?
Repeat the question, I'm sorry.
If you see a series of 3 orientation changes, just speaking hypothetically for a moment, if you see a series of 3 orientation changes, say 30 seconds separate them or thereabouts, or a minute separate them, could you explain that? Would it be very likely that a series of falls caused those orientation changes?
It depends on how many falls it was making, but being jostled around in a pocket and the light on, being turned, if it's in a person's hand and being turned back and forth, then that would be the only thing I could indicate with an orientation change.
Okay. All right. Can we pull that slideshow back up, please? Let's go forward 1, 2. Okay, 8:53:15. There you go. And this is when Maggie's phone starts showing some steps, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And you would agree that the most likely explanation for this is the phone is moving in some manner, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And those accelerometers are recording, or the bounces are jostling, that would most likely be explained by steps, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Now, you can't tell us who's carrying that phone at this time, can you?
No.
All right, next slide. All right, and so at this 8:53:20, you say there's some Siri usage and a squeezing of the side button. And let's just, is that the only explanation of why you'd see the Siri pop up on a phone, is the squeezing the side button, or are there other possibilities?
There's another possibility of her saying, hey Siri, and then that happens because it's a Siri user interface.
Okay, so there could be another explanation, but it's most likely someone squeezing the side button saying,
could be
hey,
the side
Siri.
button saying, hey Siri, but it's a user interface with it.
Okay. All right. Go to next slide, please. Actually, let's go to 8:54:34, please. Should be one more. One more. There we go. All right, and here you say the camera gets activated, correct?
That's correct.
And you think the most likely explanation is somebody swiped the camera symbol on a locked phone, correct?
Right, either swipe the camera or touch the bottom button because it's coming from the springboard lock screen.
Okay, we say bottom button. Which button?
If you're looking at an iPhone and my most recent iOS, I think it's 16 point something, in the bottom right corner, there's a button that you can touch and hold and the camera comes on. But when that happens, it comes over from the left and the camera scrolls over.
Okay. And then next slide. And then 8:54:35. This is 1 second later. The camera use ends. Correct.
That's correct. Yeah.
And so, in your opinion, based off the fact that that was used for a total 1 second, do you think that was someone intending to actually use the camera and take a picture?
I wouldn't know, but I wouldn't think so. I mean, it's just a.
But the camera's only open for a second, correct?
Right. They couldn't have taken a picture in a second.
All right. All right, 8:55:32. Okay. And we see the orientation change here at 8:55:32. Next slide. And the backlight goes off at 8:55:36, correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
And we go to the next slide, and the backlight's back on 9:03:52. So that's roughly, how long is that? Would you 8 minutes? I don't know if I'm gonna make you do math, but
Yeah, about that, yes.
and so the screen's off for that 8 minutes, correct?
That's correct.
And so, would you agree with me? It does seem likely someone's handling that phone Maggie's phone between 8:53 and 8:55, correct?
Yes.
All right. We see orientation changes. We see the potential button being pushed. Someone's got that phone in their hand, correct?
That's correct.
You can't tell us who, correct?
No, I can't.
All right. And then at 8:55:32, we see kind of an 8-minute gap in activity, correct? Between
Yes.
8:55 and 9:03, correct?
Yes.
Almost as if somebody put that phone down.
Yes, that's a possibility.
Whoever had it, correct?
Correct.
And you can't tell us where they put that phone down, right?
No, sir, I can't.
Did they put it in a vehicle,
That's very possible. I don't know.
a golf cart?
I don't know.
Okay, let's go to 9:04:23. Yep. All right. And we see this incoming call from Alex. You
Yes.
said the screen turns off almost immediately, correct?
That's correct, yes.
In your opinion, you think somebody actually hit the button to turn
Somebody
the screen
shut
off,
the screen
correct?
off, yes.
Okay. But the screen comes back on at 9:05:44, if we can go to that slide. Correct?
Yes.
And then 9:06:12, we see an orientation change, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And 2 seconds later, we see what? Next slide, please. What is this? What is
That's
this
an
indicate?
incoming call from Alex.
Okay. 2 seconds after the orientation change starts, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And then go to 9:07. Okay. And the screen goes off at 9:07, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And stays off for, what, roughly 23 minutes?
Yes.
And you just testified with Mr. Barber that Alex's car was sitting just outside his house, correct?
That's according to the documents that I reviewed. Yes.
And I don't know if you have this information in front of you, but did you determine when that GPS data shows his vehicle start to move?
Yes,
After 9:07.
Oh, after 9:07?
Well, first of all, is his vehicle stationary at 9:07?
No, it's in the driveway at 9:07, but it starts at the house at 9:06 and 52 seconds p.m.
When do you start to see motion? Or do you
9:06 and 52 seconds is where I start to see the motion there.
Okay. And 8 seconds later is when Maggie's screen turns off?
Yes.
For 23 minutes?
Yes.
And you agree that iPhone, at least with version 14.6, when the screen's off, it will not record an orientation change, correct?
That's correct.
And you agree with me that you don't know what version iOS that Mr. Barber had on his phone that you just did that demonstration?
That's correct.
Did you conduct any tests with the phone with 14.6 to see what movement can cause it to, or what can cause that phone to the screen to come on?
I don't have any 14.6 phones.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Conrad.
Mr. Sturgis, you were asked about iOS version 15 and a change in orientation behavior. Is the raise to wake feature something distinct from orientation behavior?
No, the raise to wake is a separate from orientation behavior. Raise to wake's a separate application within.
Is raise to wake the feature that causes the phone to come on with slight movement?
Yes.
Do you have any reason to believe that the raise to wake feature that you've already testified was active on Maggie Murdaugh's phone works any different than any iPhone today?
I have no evidence to prove that, no.
And again, you can refer to your notes. When Alex Murdaugh's SUV passed the location where Maggie Murdaugh's phone was recovered, the side of the road, was the screen off?
The screen was off, yes.
It was off as he approached it?
Yes.
And again, how much movement does it take to turn the screen on?
Very little movement.
And this is a separate issue from orientation changes? That's
correct.
But we're talking about, are we talking about movement activating the screen?
That's correct, yes.
Are we talking about the screen being sideways or up?
No, we're not talking about the orientation. We're talking about the actual raise to wake function on the phone.
The camera usage, and in fact, no picture was taken that you're aware of.
Right, that's correct. I didn't see any photographs there for that time.
But is it your opinion? What is your opinion about whether someone deliberately activated that camera?
I mean, they could have. They could have been an accident. I don't know. I don't know what the person could have been doing, but it was a user interaction with the device.
And there was talk about phones falling to change orientation. Can a phone change orientation without actually falling?
No, I mean, there has to be some type of movement for the phone from portrait to landscape.
Right, but you don't have to drop the phone?
No.
So
if it's sitting upright, I mean, if it's sitting on its side, I can flip it this way and the orientation changes.
If somebody's running with the phone, can it change orientation?
Yes. Those are user events that can cause that.
Can we pull up what's been previously admitted as Defense Exhibit 45? This is, as I just said, previously admitted. Do you recognize this as GPS data in a cache database?
This looks like a cache for the ZRT cell location database. Yes.
And what's the timestamp for the first entry?
It's 6/9/21 at 2:51 and 21 seconds p.m.
In your opinion, would it be fair to say that if this phone had been extracted or put in a Faraday bag a couple of days earlier, we would have GPS data from 6/7?
In my opinion, it's likely that we could.
Who put up the step data exhibit?
Sorry?
The Apple step data exhibit. Okay, we previously talked about this, Alex Murdaugh's steps. Between entries 27 and 28, you see those time periods? Just want to remember that and go to the next page. Here we have Maggie's steps. Are there any steps, periods of steps that correspond between Maggie Murdaugh and Alex Murdaugh?
No, I don't see any.
So there's no period where both phones are stepping in the same period?
No.
Okay. And if we stay on this one, if we look at entries 5 and 6, the distance is almost identical, 31 meters.
Yes, it is.
Are the steps different?
The steps are different.
Is that a significant difference?
Not a significant difference for the 5 and 6, no.
So 59 versus 43, so is that 16? It took 16 more steps to go the same distance?
Yes.
So does that indicate shorter steps?
Shorter steps, yes.
Okay, just the final question is to emphasize here. You can't tell us what a phone would do tossed out a window. That's not your expertise.
No, I can't.
But you can tell us how much motion it takes to turn on the screen.
Yes, very little motion.
And you've
Turn the screen
demonstrated
on.
that.
Several times, yes.
And that feature of the iPhone was active on her phone.
Yes,
And it is totally separate from orientation behavior.
that's correct, it is.
No further questions.
Anything further?
Just a couple things, Your Honor. You said you reviewed Paul's phone. Did you review the video that's been called the Kindle video in this case?
Yes, I have seen the video.
And did you have any information that would lead you to disagree that that video was recorded at 8:44, about 55 seconds on the night of June 7th?
No, I don't have anything.
And the location data, would you agree the location data for that video was recorded at the kennels on the Murdaugh property at Moselle?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Mr. Barber was talking to you about steps data. And just so it's clear to the jury, and I'm going to speak in hypotheticals here for a second, but if you see the iPhone record steps over an interval of about 5 minutes, for example, it records a certain number of steps over that 5 minutes.
Okay.
Does that mean, is that phone trying to tell you that someone's uniformly walking at an exact pace that keeps them moving over that entire 5 minutes?
No, not necessarily.
Okay. They could stop at some point in the middle of that, correct?
That's correct, yes.
All right. And so they could stop and pick something up in the middle of a period showing steps, correct?
That's correct. It's just the steps between those two times.
All right. So you can't testify, you can't tell us if between, pull up the steps exhibit real quick. Next slide. All right. And looking at entry 28 on Alex's phone.
Entry what, I'm sorry?
28.
28?
Yep.
Okay.
And between 902 and 906, we see, what, 283 steps? Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
All right. And you can't tell us if his phone stopped at any point between those.
No.
What's
no,
that, roughly 4 minutes or a little over 4 minutes?
No, just 283 steps between those two times.
So he could have walked 200 of those steps in the first 2 minutes and then only walked slow down for the rest of the
Right.
2 minutes, correct? Or it could have been vice versa.
Yes.
Or he could have stopped for an entire minute somewhere in there. You can't tell us any different, correct?
It'd be unlikely to stop for an entire minute. I think if you stop for that long a period of time, a new entry would be made. But
Do you know, is there a cutoff for iOS
no,
that would?
I think that just based off of what I'm seeing here, I mean, for instance, entry 29 and 30, you have about a 3-minute gap there, and
Okay.
yeah.
So maybe if he stopped for a minute, it would have started a new entry? Is
could
what you're
have.
saying?
It
All right.
could
But if he
have.
had stopped for a shorter period of time, you wouldn't necessarily have, correct?
Right.
Okay. All right. And finally, Mr. Barber has asked you about distance, and I think I want to make sure I understood you correctly. I think you testified that you would consider the actual steps count to be more accurate than the distance. Is that
I
correct?
would, yes.
Have you found any research or studies that has measured or the accuracy of steps or distance in iOS devices?
I have, yeah, and for instance, I've had cases where the step count and the GPS data is different sometimes.
Okay.
Yes.
And in your opinion, the steps count is probably more the most accurate?
In my opinion, yeah, the steps
Okay.
count is more accurate.
Okay.
You may step down. And ladies and gentlemen, that is it for today. We resume at 9:30 tomorrow. Please do not discuss the case. Anything further on this day?
Stay, Your Honor.
Nothing with the defense, Your Honor.
Okay, we'll resume at 9:30 tomorrow.